Welcome to the Lee Library Quilt Show. My name is Mary Philpott, and I'm here with Carol Way, who is not only a quilter, but is a member of the Lee Library Corporators group. So I think you'll be very impressed by our quilt show today. We have a variety of quilts. We have many different types and styles of quilts, and I think that the quilts and quilters are just wonderful, and these are real pieces of art. So let's begin our tour. The first quilt in our show is Irene Carnevale's Parasol Stars. The design is from the book by Carol Hopkins, Civil War Legacies, Roman numeral 3. This quilt was originally meant to be a small topper, but it grew to be 4 times the original size and has over 2,500 pieces. The fabric is Civil War reproduction fabric with color palettes featuring browns, reds, and greens.
Our next piece is a wall hanging by Diane Lohote.
Mm-hmm.
The title is Welcome Winter, and it's a wool applique piece. The pattern is by the Woolen Needle. There's a lot of hand embroidery embellishing in this piece. This piece would be a beautiful addition to any home.
Marty Gautran has created the Red Fox. This piece was created from a photo by Dr. Lynn Rogers, a biologist who has long studied wild black bears and is known as the bear walker. And his photo was used with permission. Dr. Rogers is founder of the Wildlife Research Institute and the North American Center in Ely, Minnesota. His photos of bears, foxes, and other mammals and birds can be found on bearstudy.org.
Christine Langenbach's wall hanging is titled Tri Yin Yang. The colors represent her 3 children's birth months, May, November, and June. The wall hanging is embellished with beading at the bottom. Since making the first one, Christine's family and friends have been requesting similar ones with their birth month.
Okay. Jane Langer's quilt is titled Pick Your Own Fruit, and this is done in a kaleidoscope pattern from Magic Stack and Whack by Bethany Reynolds. The center bottom hexagon has apple slices, the fruit being picked, and the border has images of people, and these images are also cut up and reassembled into the hexagons. And so, Carol, you can see the variety of hexagons here and the interesting little people that borders this fabric. It's pretty interesting.
It's very interesting and very beautiful.
It is a beautiful quilt.
Barbara Kubley's quilt is called Stars. This quilt is made with half-square triangles which are arranged to form the stars. Half-square triangles can be arranged in many ways to form unique quilts, and this is an example of just one of them.
And this one looks very patriotic in its red, whites, and blues. The next quilt was made by Irene Carnevale, and this is titled Never Too Late, and it's Irene's creation from some very small antique hexagon pieces. And we have a lot of those pieces, and they're from a quilt that was unfinished called Flower Garden. And the squares are different stages of being built, and when it was given to Irene. And she also had the wrapper from the batting, which includes the pattern, and small boxes from the era. This is about 100 years old. And these pieces are extremely tiny, and they are fussy cut so that they have the specific piece of the pattern in them. And we also have some of her unfinished squares, and you can see all the work and patience that took to put this together. And using this up, Irene finished this quilt, which was started about 100 years ago.
Sin Smith has made a studio quilt. This quilt is a combination of Lori Holt's pincushion quilt pattern and one of her quilt seed patterns. It was meant to be displayed in Sin's studio, draped over a Hoosier cabinet as a bright, cheery accent. The quilting is done in a circular pattern on a long-arm quilting machine. This quilt certainly would be a bright, cheery accent no matter where it was placed.
Barbara Kubley's second piece in this show is called Snail's Trail. The Snail's Trail pattern is a type of log cabin quilt, but with triangles instead of rectangles. This means that you go around the block adding a new piece, of which there are 4 different pieces in each block as you go around.
Cindy Holmes created a block of the month quilt titled Fall Harvest. Connie Logan designed a block of the month project for a quilt guild that was intended to showcase different techniques for the blocks. There is applique, curved pieces, crazy quilting, hand piecing, and prairie points. This was beautifully quilted by Karen Pratt. The result is this beautiful piece done in fall colors.
This is a gorgeous quilt, and those points all around just set it off with great flair.
The color choices are stunning as well.
Teresa Bills is a new exhibitor in our show this year, and she presents us with this quilt called Greener Pastures. This quilt captures the moment when a horse notices a friend across the field. With a lift of the head and a whinny, he canters off to join his herd mate. This quilt has some wonderful fabrics in it, embellishments and quilting that help show movement and energy to this piece, and it's a very unique piece.
It also shows the horse's glee in meeting with his soulmate there. It's so cute.
It is a great quilt.
Barbara Piazzo's beautiful quilt is called Blessings from the Hollow. This pattern is made up of half-square triangles, rectangles, squares, and looking at the outside border, you can see how many different fabrics were used and how many pieces were just in the border. Even with this many different fabrics, they all work together and give us this stunning quilt.
I especially love the name of this pattern,
Me
Blessings
too.
from the Hollow. It's
Lovely.
Great. Another new exhibitor this year is Lucille Alari Goslin, and she's created For the Love of Hexagons. This pattern can be used to make traditional quilts, as you see here with the traditional colors, or using different fabrics, you can make this into a very modern quilt and fabric.
Carolyn Anzalone's quilt is an applique flower quilt. This is a very large hand-sewn and hand-quilted piece made in 2012. The design reminds Carolyn of the Shaker song Simple Gifts, which was sung at every assembly. Her daughter was given the quilt on her graduation from Darrow School.
Teresa Bill's wall hanging is titled The Struggle. This still life with an empty absinthe glass is Teresa's tribute to Van Gogh and all the artists that struggle every day to bring their visions to life. Teresa has shared with us this wonderful piece for this show, and we're very happy to see her art.
Diane LaHote's charming quilt is titled On Wander Lane. This quilt, which was appliqued and quilted by Diana, has a block for each of the 12 months. The pattern is by Art to Heart. Diana first saw this quilt at Pumpkin Patch Quilts and loved it. Each block has great details appropriate to that month, so there is so much to see in this quilt.
Marcia Dolman's quilt is titled Dear Jane Revisited. Marcia's friend Barbara Tryon made 50 blocks in a class taught by Connie Logan at Pumpkin Patch. Before Barbara died, she left Marcia the blocks, and Marcia made 50 more blocks and created this quilt. Each block is different, and these blocks are very small with tiny details in them. This is a fabulous quilt.
I love the story behind it, that
It's a wonderful
she
story.
left those patches to her friend. Jan Tuckman made the next quilt and used a window pane quilt pattern to emphasize the fabric inside the square. This quilt is called Peeking Out. Each window is filled with people in the smaller windows. The window pane pattern provides a great border for special fabrics that you want to feature.
And this one goes, the colors are great on this, and they capture all these little figures in the windows that are very busy looking out. It's a great quilt.
It is.
Mary Polari's quilt is made up of large sections of 25 squares, and that's where the title for this quilt comes from. This is a 25-patch quilt bordered by dark blue fabric to set off all the different fabrics that she's used to make up each of these 25 squares.
I saw Mary's beautiful knitting
Yes.
in a show, and then when I ever saw her quilts, wow, she does it all.
Yes, she does.
Deborah Spence made this quilt titled Sweet Mint. The quilt has large circles representing the mint candies. The swirls are in various shades of red and pink and very festive. The border is done in pale greens. It's like finding these special sweet mints in the midst of an outdoor walk.
Kathy Hayeswood's quilt is titled Baby Sleeping. This quilt has these charming faces peeking out from their blankets in each corner, in each block. Each baby's different and very cute, and that results in this charming quilt. And we even have one that's got a Red Sox hat on, so he's ready to become a fan at some point.
Catherine Miller created this quilt called America Fading. It's 72 by 72 inches. And it's a lovely quilt sewn with reproduction vintage fabrics and featuring a variety of blocks.
Some of the blocks have flags in them, some of the blocks have stars, and many are, the large star is circled by half square triangles to make the star even larger. And this is a beautiful patriotic quilt. Elizabeth Garcia's quilt is titled Black and Red Birds and Roses, and this is machine pieced and hand quilted. This is an interesting pattern made up of diamonds and squares to make up these blocks, and the roses are on the front of the quilt and the birds are on the back. But this has also some lovely hand quilting along the black border, and there are flowers and leaves, and it's a wonderful quilt with a ripple waffle effect border. And then the roses are also on the back with the birds.
Trish Ross named this quilt My Scrappy Quilt. Trish wanted to make a throw quilt for herself with leftover squares and pieces from all of her sewing. Trish, like many of our quilters, is very generous with her time and talent and creates many pieces that she gives away. So this one is a piece for herself.
And Trish also provides bags that she quilts and makes and leaves for patrons at the library. So we want to thank Trish for all that she does for the library as well. Elizabeth Leonard's quilt is titled Entwined, and this quilt was a Pittsfield Senior Center Mystery Quilt Day project. The pattern is from the book Quick as a Wink and requires 3-yard quilts. And this is a wonderful pattern because it shows you by just moving some of the pieces what a different block you create. So this is a great quilt.
Sharon Chandler's quilt is an I Spy quilt. This quilt is one of 2 I Spy patterns from 2 different quilt magazines. Sharon plans to donate this quilt. This bright and cheerful quilt has lots of wonderful items to search for in the center of each block.
Some child is going to have a wonderful time with this quilt, and it's very nice that this will be donated to a child. Diane Westbeiser's spectacular quilt is titled Be Like Hedy. Hedy Lamarr was an Austrian-born American actress and inventor. Diane was amazed and enthralled by Hedy Lamarr after reading the book The Only Women in the Room by Marie Benedict. Hedy is an example of beauty and brains together. Diane has exhibited a quilt previously that featured a face, and Diane is able to capture all the features and expressions of the faces and the person. This is really a spectacular piece.
Christine Lagenbach's quilt is titled Arizona Buttes. Christine's son, living in Arizona, requested a version of a pencil sketch of Mount Greylock, but Christine tweaked it a bit, and the result was the Arizona Buttes. The quilting emphasizes the different parts of this wall hanging.
You can see the rays from the sun that she's quilted in, and the movement of the water that you have, and the sides of the butte as they project. It's really very interesting quilting. Bruce Carnevale, who loves 3-dimensional and 3D illusion quilt block patterns, created Boxed. This pattern is from Fabric Therapy. This quilt is built from a single pattern piece, the equilateral triangle, and the result is this 3D illusion, which is a fabulous quilt. Bruce and I share liking quilts that have this kind of optical illusions.
Judith Morrow's quilt features African queens and the men. Each block has an African queen in traditional attire or has one of the men. The clothing fabrics came direct from Africa. The colors are bold and bright. Green, yellow, red, and black are featured in the national flags of numerous African countries and in these fabrics.
Mitchell Q. Sellers' quilt is titled Peacock Gloster Tail Feather. This is the first time Mitchell tried paper piecing and he hated it, but he was determined to try it. The design is by Violet Craft Designs. The quilt was pieced and quilted by Mitchell Q. Sellers, and in the end he felt the paper piecing was worth doing and thought the design would not have been as successful if he had not used the paper piecing. And this is really a beautiful quilt.
Spectacular.
The colors are wonderful, and the fabrics too, that turn out into this beautiful quilt.
And the long arm quilting pattern that he used really adds to it. Carolyn Anzalone's unique and appropriate quilt for a library show is this bookshelf quilt. Carolyn first heard about a bookshelf quilt from a friend who asked her to make a mini one. That one turned out beautifully, even though she didn't have a pattern. From that experience, she wanted to make a larger bookshelf quilt. The pattern Carolyn used is by Patience Griffin. She found much joy in making this piece, and we get much joy in seeing it.
Yes, it has wonderful bookends. It has just great quilting, too.
So this quilt I made myself. It's Carol Way's Yellow Brick Road quilt, and it was made with my two favorite colors, yellow and blue. This quilt is machine pieced and hand quilted. I did make a few quilts when I was in my 20s and my 30s, and I did make one in 2000 when my daughter and son-in-law got married, but I haven't quilted for a long time. And now that I'm retired from teaching, I've been at it steadily.
And the quilting is beautiful, the pattern is great, and you've produced a great quilt.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Catherine B. Miller's quilt is 76 by 76, and it's titled Pineapples Galore. This quilt features a pineapple pattern, which is a variation of the log cabin quilt pattern. The pineapple has been a symbol of hospitality since colonial times, and quilt makers have used the pineapple shape to express goodwill for generations. And this one has beautiful colors and fabrics in it.
Jeff Morse is exhibiting for the first time in our show. His quilt, Cosmic Growth, is also the first quilt he's ever made. We've had some interesting discussions about this pattern because some think of it as crystals growing, others as water splashing, or even leaves falling. We are looking forward to seeing more of Jeff's work.
Jeff is a blue ribbon knitter as well, and now he's moved into quilting, and he started off with this piece, and this piece has these tiny little squares and pieces in it, which was quite a surprise when he put it together as to how many pieces it would take. So this is a wonderful piece, great way to start.
And I looked at it and thought heavy on the bottom and light as air on the top.
Everybody has a different. Sin Smith's quilt is called Don't Fence Me In. Using Lori Holt fabric in nostalgic colors and prints, the rail fence blocks are surrounded by escaping flying goose blocks. Even some escaped onto the back, which you can see here. And here they are. Those are the flying geese pattern. This quilting also has beautiful quilting done on the long arm machine, and it gives emphasis to the various blocks. This is a very cheerful quilt with great fabrics in it.
Our next quilt is Elizabeth Garcia's Celtic Knot. This beautiful quilt is hand appliqued and hand quilted. The Celtic spiral knot, also known as the Triscali tri-scale, is comprised of a single line that splits into 3 spirals. This ancient design, dating back to around 3200 BC, symbolizes the concept of triplicity, such as life, death, and rebirth, or the elements of earth, fire, and water.
Marty Gautran's wall hanging is titled Frolicsome Fish. This collage was started in an online collage class with Susan Carlson. Marty's goal was to make the fish colorful as well as whimsical, And Marty certainly has succeeded with a wonderful collection of fabrics and quilting. And this is a very bright, cheerful fish. And the quilting is wonderful because it follows the waves of the water and it gives it movement as well.
Deborah Spence has made a Tree of Life quilt. This Tree of Life pattern has been a popular textile design since the 1700s as one of the most well-known patterns in the world. The symbol of the Tree of Life has been around since the beginning of recorded history and appears in many religions and mythologies. This is my second quilt in the show, so Carol Way's Pinwheel quilt, and it was inspired by my grandmother. I bought the fabric about 15 years ago when the pumpkin patch was on Center Street. The fabric is vintage reproduction, very similar to the fabric used by my grandmother. My quilt is machine pieced and hand quilted.
And again, you did a great job on this. It reminds me of quilts we grew up with also that were vintage fabrics. Yeah, it's a great quilt.
It was fun to work with.
And this is Mary Polari's quilt called Seeing Stars, and it's sewn in shades of red fabric to create the stars, and it uses half square triangles and squares to make this pattern. So this is a very vivid colored quilt, full of life, and a great job.
Christine Langenbach has made the next piece in the flying geese pattern, pieces. These flying geese hanging pieces are hand quilted. The flying geese pattern quilts were important in history. Not only did they help slaves find safety and allies, but they were a symbol of hope. These two pieces were made to be gifts for Christine's family.
Elizabeth Leonard's piece is titled Reflections. It's made of wool applique and hand embroidery. Each piece that is appliqued on has blanket stitch going at the edges, and then details are added on the other pieces with embroidery stitches. This is really a very lovely piece.
Sarah Jean Burke is another new exhibitor to our show this year. She has created a zippered pouch using vintage fabric. This is also another great way to use up those special small pieces from your collection. Mary, I want to thank you so much for inviting me to the show and to helping you this time.
This has been great. I've enjoyed having you help show the pieces. They're wonderful pieces, and I want to give a special thank you to all our quilters for sharing their work with us. It's fabulous work, and it takes so much time. And also, I want to thank Susan Sullivan for helping us do this quilting show, for all the work that she does, and that's great. And we wouldn't be able to show this wonderful quilt show to the public without the help of CTSB, and especially our videographer, Joe Fuchsia, who's doing a great job for us. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.